I loved that person and I never told them. And then, 50 years later, you'd be like, why didn't I tell her? Why didn't I go after it? I was talking about with my mom and my dad, who's a Cuban immigrant, and he came to the U.S. when he was 16 in refugee camp in the Everglades. My mom had me when she was 17 years old, and she was still in high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this is in 1964. I can assure you that being a pregnant teenager in high school was not cool in Albuquerque, New Mexico at that time. And so it was difficult for her. My grandfather went to bat for her when they tried to kick her out of school, and I loved that person and I never told them. And then, 50 years later, you'd be like, why didn't I tell her? Why didn't I go after it? So that's the kind of life regret that is very hard to be happy about when you're telling yourself in a private moment that story of your life. A year after we got married, I went to her and said, I want to quit my job, move across the country, and start this internet bookstore. And Mackenzie, of course, like everybody that I explained this to, her first question was, what's the internet? Because nobody knew. This is 1994.
Did you think that you should move from investment banking to really launch a company?
I think I'd always wanted to do it, even since I was a kid. Had the idea. One of the people who every time I look at something, it looks like it could be improved. There's something wrong with it. So I go through like, wow, how could this restaurant be better? And so I've always had that kind of idea. And but even before she could say what's the internet, she said, great, let's go, because she wanted to support it, and she knew that I had always had this passion for invention and starting a company. And so again, I think Mackenzie is an example of this, but they're so loving and supportive that when you have loving and supportive people in your life, like Mackenzie, my parents, my grandfather, my grandmother, you end up being able to take risk. Because I think it's one of those things, it doesn't, you kind of know somebody's got your back. And so it's just, I don't even think you're thinking about it logically, it's an emotional thing. So for
That's really interesting. You think that unconditional love, if you feel and experience unconditional love, I
think it helps you take risk in life. And by the way,
yeah.
I think it's probably true of all kinds of risks in life, not just starting a business. I mean, life is full of different risks. And I think that when you think about the things that you will regret when you're 80, they are almost always the things that you did not do. They are acts of omission. Very rarely are you going to regret something that you did and it failed and didn't work or whatever. But the acts of omission, the thing, and it's not, and again, I'm not just talking about business things, it's like, look, we all get gifts. We get certain things in our life that are, that we're very lucky about, and one of the most powerful one is who your early role models are. They could be
was your grandfather.
It was in a big sense. My mom and dad, but my grandfather too. And so I think it's anyway. I've won that lottery. I won that lottery of having so many people in my life who have given me that unconditional love. And so,
I mean, Amazon had serious crises. In 2002, you went almost bankrupt. So
we're about how we were about to be destroyed by this much larger company. We had 125 employees and $60 million a year in annual sales. 60 million with an M. And that, and Barnes & Noble at the time had 30,000 employees and about $3 billion in sales. So they were giant, we were tiny, and we had limited resources. And the headlines were very negative about Amazon. And the one that's most memorable was just Amazon.toast. And so I called an all-hands meeting, which was not hard to do with just 125 people. We got in a room, and because it was so scary for all of us, this idea that now we finally had a big competitor, that literally everybody's parents were calling. I do believe that. I think that if you stay focused, then the more drama there is and everything else, no matter what the drama is, whatever the external distraction is, what your response to it should be to double down on the customer, satisfying them, not just satisfying them, delighting them. Being resourceful, I think, is you can't, if there's a problem, there's a solution. And of course, as you mature and get into the business world and anything you do on a team, you very quickly realize that it's not about just your own resourcefulness, it's about team resourcefulness and how does that work. And when you're criticized, first look in a mirror and decide, are your critics right? If they're right, change. Don't resist. Right? No. But not in this case. But we've had critics be right before, and we've changed. We have made mistakes, and I can go through a long list. There are two kinds of critics. There are well-meaning critics who, they're worried it's not going to work, but they do want it to work. There's a second kind of critic, which is the self-interested critic, and they come in all shapes and sizes. So they can be any kind of institution, competitors, of course. And so when you are doing something in a new way, and if customers embrace the new way, what's going to happen is incumbents who are practicing the older way are not going to like you. And they're going to be self-interested critics. And so you do need, as you're looking yourself in the mirror, to try and tease those two things apart. That's just part of the terrain. You have to accept that. One that I tell people is, if you're going to do anything new or innovative, you have to be willing to be misunderstood. If you can't afford to be misunderstood, then for goodness sake, don't do anything new or innovative. Right. Amazon is now a large corporation, and I expect us to be scrutinized. We should be scrutinized. I think all large institutions should be scrutinized and examined. It's reasonable. And one thing to note about us is that we have gotten big in absolute terms only very recently. So we've always been growing fast in percentage terms. But in 2010, just 8 years ago, we had 30,000 employees. So in the last 8 years, we've gone from 30,000 employees to 560,000 employees. So for us, it's kind of, in my mind, I'm still delivering the packages to the post office myself. You see what I'm saying? I still have all the memories of, hoping that one day we could afford a forklift. And so obviously that's my intellectual brain knows that's just not the case anymore. We have 560,000 employees all over the world. And I know we should be scrutinized, and I think it's true. Big government institutions should be scrutinized, big nonprofit institutions should be scrutinized, big universities should be scrutinized. It just makes sense. And that's, by the way, why the work that the Washington Post and the other great newspapers around the world do is so important, because they're often the ones doing that initial scrutiny even before the government agencies do them. Earning trust with customers is a valuable business asset, and if you mistreat their data, they will know. They will figure it out. Customers are very smart. You should never underestimate customers. The great thing about humans in general is we're always improving things, and so entrepreneurs and inventors, if they follow their curiosity and they follow their passions and they figure something out and then they figure out how to make it better, and they're never satisfied. And you need to harness that. In my view, you need to harness that energy primarily on your customers instead of on your competitors. And so where I sometimes see companies and even young, small startup companies, entrepreneurs go awry, is they start to pay more attention to their competition than they do to their customers. And I think that in big mature industries, that might be a winning approach in some cases, kind of close following. Let other people be the pioneers and go down the blind alleys. There's many things that a new inventive company tries won't work. And so those mistakes and errors and failures do cost real money. And so maybe in a mature industry where growth rates are slow and change is very slow. But as you see in the world more and more, there aren't very many mature industries. Change is happening everywhere. You know, we see it in the automobile industry with self-driving cars, but you could go right down the line of every industry and you would see it. I don't want my great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren to live in a civilization of stasis. We all enjoy a dynamic civilization of growth and change, and let's think about what powers that. We are not really energy constrained, and the reality is if I'm happy at home, I come into the office with tremendous energy. And if I'm happy at work, I come home with tremendous energy. And so it actually is a circle, it's not a balance. And I think that is worth everybody paying attention to. You never want to be that guy, and we all know, we all have a coworker who is that person who as soon as they come into the meeting, they drain all of the energy out of the room. You can just feel the energy level go. You don't want to be that guy. So you want to come into the office and give everybody a kick in their step.
Thanks for watching, my friend. In my video you have seen Jeff Bezos' space program and his company Blue Origin. And also we heard Jeff Bezos' life story. And good luck to him to competing with SpaceX.